Chinggis Khan, founder of the Mongol Empire, is rather famous for having a lot of children, but 4 of them stand out above the rest. These were the sons with his grand empress, Börte Hatun, Jochi, Chakadai, Ögedai, and Tolui. In this video, we focus on the life of Jochi, a fearsome warrior utterly devoted to his father, but ultimately doomed by his uncertain heritage. Of all Chinggis' sons, it is Jochi whose life most often captures people's attention. If any of them receive sympathy by writers both modern and medieval, it is Jochi. His unclear paternity and conflict between him, his father, and his brothers make for very dramatic material. Some try to see in Jochi even a more peaceful nature that put him on a collision course with his father, and rumors that Chinggis Khan even had him poisoned. But how true are these depictions? We will address them here, as well as offering a reconstruction of Jochi's life. The official Mongolian imperial accounts of the 13th and 14th centuries reduced Jochi's role in the early empire, and it's only relatively recently, by comparing sources from across and outside of the Mongol Empire, that we can really start to piece together a fuller image of Jochi Khan. This first part is a biographical narrative, and in a follow-up video I will discuss some of these more argumentative aspects of his life and explain choices that I made and argued for in this video. When you see one of these numbers in this video, that means you can check it in that other video and get some further detail on it there. Now, on with the life of Jochi. Our story begins in the northern Mongolian steppe around the year 1180, some 26 years before the founding of the Mongol Empire. Chinggis Khan was by then known only by his personal name, Temujin, then about 18 years old. Recently married to Börte of the Kongarad, they just had their first child, a daughter named Khwarezmshah. A year or so later, their camp was attacked by a party of Merkit, under their ruler Toktogabeki. A generation prior, Temujin's mother Ögulun had been married to Yekichiludu of the Uduyit Merkit, but then had been stolen by Temujin's father Yisugai. Chiludu's family had not forgotten that offense, and years later returned the favor, capturing Börte and other women in Temujin's camp. They were taken north to the Merkit territory along the Selenga River, where Börte was then married off to Chiludu's younger brother, Bilgerbulko. Temujin rescued her the next year with the aid of his overlord, Togorul Khan of the Karyat Khanate, and a childhood friend named Jamuka of the Jadaran. They stormed the Merkit camp, sent Toktoga fleeing, and found Börte. Aside from a considerable amount of loot taken from the Merkit, they also left with another unexpected thing. Börte was pregnant and gave birth while they stayed in Jamuka's camp. The young boy was named Jochi, which, in some of our sources, means guest. It was unclear if he was the son of Temujin or of the Merkit Bilger. However, Chinggis Khan, publicly at least, always treated Jochi as fully legitimate, and tried to clamp down on any talk to the contrary. He was so effective at this that it was not really publicly known until almost 800 years later. We know almost nothing of Jochi for the next 20 years. We can infer that he was raised like most steppe nomads of the time, learning to ride a horse before he could walk, and trained to use a bow from a young age. In his later life, he was a famous hunter, something he had learned to do while very young. It was also very valuable training for warfare. Jochi was not taught to read or write as a youth, for the Uyghur script had not yet been adopted for the Mongolian language. There is some indication that even as an adult, Jochi never learned it despite his father's orders to. As his father fought his rivals in the Mongolian plateau in the final years of the 12th century, it is very likely that Jochi took part in this warfare too, but it is not recorded. Our first concrete event in the life of Jochi comes from around the year 1202. That year, Temujin tried to arrange a Khuda marriage alliance with Togorul Khan of the Karyat. Temujin proposed that Togorul's daughter Chagaur Beki wed Jochi. The plan never materialized, and soon after Togorul betrayed Temujin. By then, Jochi was probably about 20 years old with at least one wife, probably the mother of his first two children, a son named Orda and a daughter named Holui. Jochi took numerous wives, of which about 12 can be named. According to the early 14th century source Rashid ad-Din, Jochi fathered some 40 sons in total, though only about 14 of their names are known, in addition to the names of two daughters. The most famous of these sons was Batu, born around 1205. In 1206, Jochi's father formally declared the Mongol Empire and took the title of Chinggis Khan. At the Great Hurtai that year, Jochi and his brothers each received subjects. In the secret history of the Mongols, Jochi received 9 Minkat, 9,000 men and their families, as both military units and tax-paying subjects, which was more than what his brothers received. Our next stage in Jochi's life may be 1207, when the Oirat, under their leader Hudaka Beki, submitted to the Mongol Empire. Either at this juncture, or following Hudaka's display of loyalty in 1217, Jochi's sister Chechiagin and his daughter Holui were married to Hudaka's two sons. Another of Jochi's daughters was married to Ozar, ruler of the Karluks of Al-Muluk. A vassal of the Karakitai Empire in Central Asia, Ozar declared for the Mongol Empire sometime between 1210 to 11, and both he and later his son, Signaktagan, received a daughter of Jochi in marriage. Jochi's relative importance in the early empire can be inferred through the marriages of his daughters. We have almost no information of the marriages of any of his brother's daughters at any time, and it is even rarer for any to be named. That at least 2 of Jochi's daughters were named and were key to solidifying these early submissions perhaps indicates Jochi's daughters were second in rank to Chinggis' own. Jochi joined his father's invasion of the Jurchen-ruled Jin dynasty in North China in 1211. After Chinggis Khan took the Jin dynasty's border forts guarding the Yehuling Pass through the Yin Mountains, he divided his army into 2 main wings. Chinggis took the left wing to push down the Yehuling Pass, while Jochi was given command of the right wing, joined by his brothers Chagatai and Ögedai. Jochi led his brothers first into the area of today's Höhut and Datong, the Jin's western capital. A number of cities, mainly in the northern part of today's Shanxi, fell to them. Though the prince's armies may have separated for part of this campaign, they all took part in the general withdrawal in early 1212. In winter 1213, after breaking through the pass of Zhuyongguan and beginning the blockade of the Jin dynasty's supreme capital of Zhongdu, Chinggis Khan unleashed the armies of his sons and generals across the North China plain. Their mission was to wreak havoc and stretch Jin resources, and in the process collect a vast quantity of loot, animals, and slaves. Jochi was once again in command of the right wing, and took Chagatai and Ögedai with him, pushing through the Taihong Mountains in a lengthy campaign through dozens of cities and environments. Pushing south through today's Hebei province down to the Yellow River, before marching northwest into southern Shanxi, sacking cities all the way past Taiyuan. The princes honed their skills as commanders and conquerors, and through constant sieges, aided by an influx of Jin dynasty defectors who built them machines, they learned the secrets of siege warfare. By the end of 1214, much of the Mongol army withdrew back to the steppes in modern Inner Mongolia, south of the Gobi Desert, as the submission of the Jin dynasty had been obtained with the surrender of Zhongdu. Though the war resumed later that year, Chinggis Khan left command in China to the general Samulka and journeyed north of the Gobi with his sons. In 1216 or 1217, a great Hurultai was held on the Black Forest of the Tuul River in northern Mongolia. Here, Chinggis Khan made his plans to deal with what had occurred while he'd been absent in North China. The usurpation of Karakitai by the Naiman Prince Huchelug, a rebellion amongst the peoples of the southern Siberian forests, and the hunt down remnants of the Merkit who had fled west across the Eurasian steppes. Jochi was tasked with solving 2 of these. In 1216, a large revolt against Mongol rule began among the Khwarezm, southeast of Lake Baikal. When Chinggis ordered the Kyrgyz Confederation to provide troops to help put it down, the Kyrgyz refused and joined in the revolt. When one of Chinggis' old comrades, Börte, was killed by the Tumid, Chinggis was furious and sent 2 armies north. Dorbe Dokshin against the Tumid, and Jochi against the Kyrgyz. Crossing the frozen Selenga and Yenisei rivers and through the Sayan mountains, Jochi left the steppes for the mountainous, forested terrain of southern Siberia. Jochi first struck the vassals of the Kyrgyz, a variety of Mongolic, Turkic, Samoyedic, Iranic, and Ketic-speaking peoples like the Ursut, Kalkanas, Kankas, and Tuvans. Then Jochi attacked the Kyrgyz core territory along the Yenisei. The Kyrgyz lords, represented by Urusinal and Orebegtegan, surrendered to Jochi with a tribute of white falcons, white geldings, and black sables. Jochi took a number of hostages to keep them in line and bolster his forces. The campaign was fast, and Chinggis congratulated his son on an impressive victory done in difficult terrain, and assigned these people to be part of Jochi's khubi, his share or property. Jochi's task was not done though. He then traveled southwest to join a then secondary general named Subadai, or as he was known at the time, Subagadai, in the pursuit of the Merkits who had fled west over the steppes. In 1217, Jochi and Subadai were very close in age, but at that point Jochi had more experience as a commander and was likely in charge. Jochi and Subadai's armies probably united west of the Altai Mountains, likely on the Irdish River. From there they set out with the Uyghur Idikut Barchuk Arktegan in the vanguard. Following them was their Aguruk, the main camp of families, wagons, and herds, which moved slower and carried the supplies for the faster-moving advance forces. They traveled across the steppes of today's Kazakhstan, and in late 1217 or 1218 on the Chem River northeast of the Caspian Sea, caught the Merkit under Hodu, a son or brother of the late Merkit Lord Toktok Beki. Subadai sent Barchuk and his Uyghur vanguard to scout out the Merkit, camp for the night, and then depart, leaving behind children's toys and things for infants. The Merkit were tricked into thinking the Uyghur had approached with their families and rushed upon what they thought was a vulnerable enemy, only to be met instead with Jochi and Subadai's full army. The Merkit were swiftly defeated. Hodu fled with the survivors and their families west over the Ural River, Jochi in pursuit. Hodu sought protection with Yunas, the lord of the Ulverli and the Kipchak along the Ural and Volga rivers. At that time, Yunas was old and already dealing with an unspecified instability in his realm, and was perhaps unable to raise most of his potential forces. The Mongols demanded he hand over Hodu, and he refused. Battle was then met at a site possibly called Uyuk, somewhere between the Volga and Ural rivers, most probably in late 1218. Yunas and Hodu were killed in the battle, and many women and children taken captive. The Merkit were destroyed, and the Ulverli were left in shambles, though the last Merkit prince, Toktoka Beki's youngest son, Holtukhan Mergen, was captured in that battle. Holtukhan was a famed archer, even by Mongol standards. Jochi asked for a demonstration, and Holtukhan sent an arrow into a target, then split that arrow with his next shot. Himself a keen hunter and archer, Jochi was pleased and kept Holtukhan in his court. Jochi sent a messenger ahead to his father asking that Holtukhan's life be spared, and Chinggis Khan did not approve. In the writing of the Ilkhanid vizier Rashid ad-Din, Chinggis, on account of his sufferings from the Merkit, demanded Holtukhan's death. Jochi followed his father's order. After the victory at Uyuk, Jochi and Subadai began the long trek back to Mongolia, laden with booty and captives. But in early 1219, near the Irgiz River in western Kazakhstan, they were confronted by a larger army under Allah ad-Din Muhammad II, the aggressive ruler of the Khwarezmian Empire. Muhammad's military, chiefly Kipchak Kongli cavalry, was a large and experienced force moving with speed to intercept the Mongols in the steppe. This was all taking place after Muhammad's uncle had massacred a large trade caravan Chinggis Khan had sent to the Khwarezmian city of Otrar in 1218, after the opening of trade ties between the two empires. Chinggis had sent envoys to Muhammad Khwarezmshah demanding recompense, which Muhammad then executed. If expecting war with the Mongol Empire, Muhammad may have hoped to make a strong early blow by taking out their crown prince as he passed north of the Khwarezmian lands. In the account of Ibn al-Athir, our most contemporary writer to the battle, Muhammad first attacked Jochi's Aguruk and captured many of his army's women and children. Jochi sent an envoy explaining to Muhammad that he'd been sent after his father's enemies and that he wasn't permitted to attack the Khwarezmshah. Muhammad told Jochi's envoys to prepare for battle. The accounts agree that the Khwarezmian host was larger, anywhere from 2 to 3 times the size of Jochi's force. Victory must have seemed certain. Battle lasted through the day, the right wing of each army pushing back the opposing left. Jochi himself led the charges and came under threat, but a timely rally by his Keshig saved him. Meanwhile, a Mongol charge on the Khwarezmian center nearly captured Shah Muhammad, only for Muhammad's son Jalal ad-Din to lead a countercharge that rescued him. As night fell, the armies drew apart. Subadai ordered each soldier to light multiple fires, making it appear that they were setting up camp, and then withdrew. In the morning, the Khwarezmians were shocked to see the Mongols had disappeared. Apparently, the ferocity of the Mongols made Khwarezmshah Muhammad too afraid to face them in the open field ever again. After the battle, Jochi may not have returned to Mongolia proper. I suspect when he reached Kayak en route in summer 1219, he was met by his father's army already on their way to attack Khwarezm. Chinggis Khan and all 4 of his sons crashed down on the Khwarezmian border city of Otrar in late 1219. Here, Chinggis divided his forces. Jochi was sent north along the Sirdarya River in early 1220. In quick succession, Signak, Uzkent, Barlikent, Ashnash, Yand, and Yanikent fell to his forces. He appointed governors over the cities he had taken, then took his armies to the steppes northeast of the Aral Sea, where he spent the remainder of 1220 campaigning against the Kongli, steppe allies of the Khwarezmshahs. Jochi guarded this northern flank while his father and brothers pushed southwards deeper into the Khwarezmian Empire. He did return south briefly to put down a rebellion at Yanikent, caused by the Khwarezmian general Timur Malik. At the end of 1220, his father sent orders for his next assignment. Jochi, with his brothers Takatai and Urgadai, were to bring their forces in a vast pincer movement against Jurganj, the former capital of the Khwarezmian Empire. This battle determined Jochi's future. While the Mongol imperial accounts tend to minimize Jochi's role in this siege, our external sources are consistent in giving him overall command. And on Nazavi's account, it is Jochi who conducts diplomacy with the garrison, commanded by a Kongli lord named Kumartigan. As Mongol armies encircled the city, Jochi sent a message to the defenders, stating that Chinggis Khan had granted the city to him and that they should surrender. Kumartigan, however, trusted in the strength of his walls and garrison and defied them. Jochi and Chagatai fought over how to conduct the siege, likely relating to the fact Jochi was supposed to receive this city. The indecision in the overall command hampered their efforts, and staunch resistance inflicted high losses on the Mongols in brutal combat for the walls and streets. Naphtha burned down much of the city. The Mongols broke a nearby dam and flooded the rest. After 4 months, a delegation came out to surrender, which Jochi showed respect to. However, he was not going to be merciful. The remaining population was driven out onto the plain before the city. Artisans and craftsmen were separated and carried off into Mongol service. Children and young women were enslaved and the rest slaughtered. Juzjani has an extra detail that Jochi ordered a number of the women to undress and fight each other for the entertainment of the Mongol troops. And at the end of the day, they were killed. Rashid ad-Din, writing 80 years later, said skeletons of the slain, Mongol and Khwarezmian alike, were still piled up around Jurganj. After the fall of the city around April 1221, the princes went their separate ways and on bad terms. Chagatai and Urgadai joined their father in the south, while Jochi returned to the north. Mongol imperial accounts from here tend to have Jochi spend his time hunting. However, according to external sources like Juzjani, Jochi campaigned against the Kipchak in the steppes between the Caspian and Aral Seas, where he stayed from 1221 to late 1222. He may have fought as far as the Ural River, which remained the border of the Mongol Empire until Batu's campaign of the 1230s. After the defeat of Jalal ad-Din Khwarezmshah on the Indus River in November 1221, Chinggis Khan began the march back to Mongolia. During winter 1222, while staying near Samarkand, Chinggis alerted his sons that he planned to hold a Hurultai next summer at Qulan Bashi, south of the Karatau Mountains in Kazakhstan, and Jochi came in style. According to Juveni, Jochi and his forces arrived at the meeting driving before them a vast herd of game and 1,000 wild horses. Together, father and sons had a grand hunt and slew many. Summer 1223 was spent at Qulan Bashi. Our sole source for the meeting, Juveni, only notes the horse hunt and the execution of a group of Uyghur lords. Yet, it was the last meeting of Chinggis Khan and his 4 sons. When Jochi left in the fall of 1223, he never saw his father or brothers again. Within 2 years, he was dead. So what happened at Qulan Bashi? It seems the succession to Chinggis Khan, by then in his 60s, was there determined. Jochi had previously held the most prominent role as commander amongst his brothers, but the siege of Jurganj made one thing clear. Jochi's relationship with his brothers, especially Chagatai, was troubled. I think Qulan Bashi in 1223 may be the occasion of their most famous argument from the secret history of the Mongols, assuming it's not purely a literary creation made by the secret historian in 1252, of course. When Chinggis sat with his sons to discuss the succession, he spoke first to Jochi. Before Jochi answered, Chagatai insulted him and called him a Merkit bastard. The two were quickly at each other's throats and had to be pulled apart. Jochi's uncertain paternity, an issue Chinggis tried to put to rest, was something that Chagatai could not look past, and Jochi couldn't back down from his challenge. Should either become Khan, then civil war loomed. Chagatai proposed a solution. Their brother, Erkadai, should succeed their father. Jochi, perhaps reluctantly, accepted. After that, Chinggis allotted sections of the empire, or ulus, for Jochi and Chagatai to appease them. Jochi received the lands he had conquered, from the Irdish River in the east, westwards across the steppes as far as the hooves of his horses could take them, while Chagatai's was the land from Beshmalik to Samarkand and Bukhara. Despite this, it's not hard to imagine Jochi's bitterness as he rode away from Qulan Bashi in fall 1223, having lost a throne he thought was his. Jochi's final years are murky. After Qulan Bashi, Chinggis Khan continued for Mongolia and ordered Jochi to campaign against the Kipchak. In late 1223 or 24, we know that the army of Subadai, returning from the Kalka River battle, arrived at Jochi's Urdu and presented him with a captured Rus prince. Jochi had him executed, and Subadai continued on to Mongolia. By then, Jochi appears to have abandoned his Kipchak campaign. Doing so was rather unusual for him, as he's consistently described as utterly obedient to his father's will and always on campaign on his behalf. Excluded from the succession, though, a depressed Jochi may have no longer seen the value in his efforts and essentially given up. After 1223, the once vigorous warrior spent his time hunting, chiefly in the pastures between the Irdish River and Lake Alakol on today's easternmost Kazakhstan. Basically, the opposite end of the steppe from where he was supposed to be. He stayed there until his death. Chinggis's frustration with Jochi is common across the accounts of his demise, though sources diverge on how it actually occurs. Juzjani, one of our earliest accounts on it and a virulently anti-Mongol author, has an elaborate and unlikely story where Jochi plots to ally with the Khwarezmshahs and is poisoned by his father for that. Juveni, another early account, states only that Jochi died after he returned to his lands from Qulan Bashi. The most detailed account of Jochi's demise is in the Jami al-Tawarik of Rashid ad-Din. Here, Jochi refused to campaign against the Kipchak, staying along the Irdish. When Chinggis demanded Jochi present himself before him, Jochi said he was ill and sent gifts and apologies. Jochi's illness and excuses increasingly, though, looked like insubordination. The last straw came when a traveler reached Chinggis's camp saying that Jochi was faking and had been seen hunting. Chinggis was furious and ordered an army to set out with Chagatai and Ogadai in the vanguard. But another message came. Jochi had died from his illness. Chinggis Khan was grief-stricken and demanded the traveler he had spoken, but the man could not be found. If Rashid ad-Din is correct, then Jochi's death must date to 1224 to early 1225. The crisis with Jochi may explain why Chinggis spent so much of 1224 on the Upper Erdish, taking 2 years to journey from Bashi to Mongolia, a distance he had previously covered in only months. So ends the life of Jochi. Assuming he was born around 1182, then Jochi was about 43 years old at the time of his death. I am personally inclined to think that Rashid ad-Din gives the most likely scenario for Jochi's final days, but I don't think we can say what happened definitively. Chinggis Khan, though, immediately recognized the accession of Jochi's sons. Orda, the older, inherited Jochi's Ordu between the Erdish River and Lake Alakol, while Batu, the next brother, took all of the western territory. In the 1230s, with the assistance of his father's old comrade Subadai, Batu conquered the remainder of the Kipchak, the Volga Bulgars, the Rus principalities, and drove Mongol armies into Hungary and Poland. Batu spent the rest of his life in the steppes west of the Volga River, which became the core of what is known to later historians as the Golden Horde, but his more contemporary name appears to have been the Jochi Ulus, the Ulus of Jochi. So what do we make of Jochi then? Was he more humanitarian than his brothers? With a distaste for bloodshed? I don't think so. In fact, I would argue the sources portray Jochi as an extremely eager and willing participant in the conquests and devoted to his father's word and always carrying out campaigns on his behalf. Not reluctantly, but very willingly. Jochi's disillusionment came from his loss of the throne, something he probably had been pushing himself for endlessly with the expectation he was the most likely candidate to receive it. Burnt out by relentless campaigning and doomed by the nature of his birth, a factor outside of his control, Jochi's life does have a certain Shakespearean tragedy to it, I suppose, something which still catches the imagination of people today. Even while working on this script, I learned of television projects entering production on his life. It'll be interesting to see which elements of his life they choose to draw from. Remember to check out the follow-up video where I will explain in detail all of the extra information that did not fit into this video.